Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
We are diving into a life story today that really challenges one of those old cynical lines you hear, sometimes even from the man we're talking about, Scott Ballew.
People, they don't change.
Exactly. But Ballew's journey, well, it suggests that huge, profound change isn't just possible. It can actually be like the ultimate creative catalyst.
It's pretty fascinating how extreme the evolution is here. And it's got so many different facets.
Yeah.
We're basically charting a path that's anything but straight. From this celebrated Texas high school football star
Right?
to a really successful commercial and film director, then through this decade consumed by severe opiate addiction,
A really dark period.
and then finally emerging as this really profound songwriter signed to La Honda Records. It's quite the arc.
That dramatic summary, the Texas jock to successful director to severe junkie to acclaimed musician, that's definitely the hook.
Sure.
But our mission really in this deep dive is to get beyond just the drama. We want to analyze the actual mechanics of this transformation.
How did it all fit together?
Right. How did these incredibly different life experiences, holding a Rose Bowl ring versus writing songs about waking up needing pills, how did they not just happen to him, but how did they actively, structure his artistic identity?
Mm-hmm.
We're really trying to study how that fierce, that all-in addictive personality, how it can be channeled away from self-destruction
Yeah.
and into this powerful, really focused creative engine.
And that channeling part, that's absolutely the key. The whole narrative, it's like a masterclass in transformation.
Yeah.
It shows how that desire to just push things to the absolute limit, whether it was, his body in sports or the scope of a film project.
It's drug use.
Or,
Yeah.
it's tragically pushing his substance use. How that same drive eventually found this noble purpose in the relentless day in, day out grind of making authentic art.
Okay, so to really get that transformation, we have to start where the conflict began for him.
Yeah.
Which was Texas.
Definitely. The sources right away point to this really contradictory relationship Ballew had with his home state.
It seems centered around Austin, right? Feeling different from the rest of Texas.
Exactly. He paints this incredibly vivid picture of growing up. Talks about these early memories, driving up I-35 to Dallas with his granddad.
And the details are just pure old school Texas.
Oh, yeah. The Stetson, the jeans tucked into boots, driving this old pickup. Ballew even mentions sometimes getting hit by tobacco spit flying out the window.
Wow. Okay.
It's this very rigid, traditional image of Texas masculinity.
But then he talks about this feeling, this huge sense of relief every single time they were driving back south towards Austin.
Yeah. Austin felt different to him.
He saw it as the epicenter of something else entirely, the heart of that whole cowboy hippie movement from the 70s.
Defined by the originals. People like Willie Nelson, Jerry Jeff Walker, Gary P. Nunn, all operating out of that legendary venue, the original Armadillo World Headquarters.
Almost mythical now.
Absolutely. And that context is important for you listening. The Armadillo, back in the 70s, it was where this cultural collision happened, like a beer hall that brought hippies and rednecks together. Unlikely mix.
Totally. And it merged counterculture with traditional country music, basically inventing the Austin sound. So Ballew grew up aware of those roots, but they didn't really click for him at first.
Why not?
Because he was caught in the other rigid Texas expectation.
The athlete trap. That's what the sources call it.
Yeah. For Ballew, growing up, society basically said, if you're a boy, you're a sports hero. If you're a girl, you're a cheerleader. End of story.
And he wasn't just in the trap. He was like the star quarterback in the trap. Friday Night Lights wasn't just a show for him. It was life.
He didn't just play, he excelled. Became a local legend. The sources talk about his high school football fame, setting a school record 7 touchdowns in one game.
Wow.
He was the definition of that powerful male athlete, seen as a Texan, just born to do it.
Yeah.
But underneath all that success,
He wanted out.
yeah, this growing desire to escape that identity they projected onto him.
Which brings us to how deeply he rejected that past. It's almost hard to believe.
It really is. He was good enough to play college ball anywhere, basically, but he chose the University of Washington.
And the reason why is so telling.
It's almost like this adolescent fantasy, right? He thought he could somehow meet Kurt Cobain and Eddie Vedder.
The icons of grunge. Basically, the polar opposite of the Texas jock identity he was living. He saw them as authentic.
He was literally running away from his own identity.
Think about how total that rejection was. A friend. Someone who knew him for 3 years.
Lived with him, worked with him.
Shared personal stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
and had no idea Ballew even had a Rose Bowl ring.
He just wouldn't talk about it.
Refused. It was an identity he felt he absolutely had to bury to chase something he felt was more real, more authentic to him.
So fast forward to when he moves to LA. He wasn't just leaving Texas behind, he was actively trying to hide it.
Yeah, hide the fact he was Texan. The contrast must have been huge for him. He felt really self-conscious.
Admits feeling out of place around surfers and skaters and people that went to art school.
People who just seemed to have this built-in creative confidence.
While he felt like, in his own words, I just played football in Texas, like that was all he was.
And this move, it was purely driven by that desperate need for reinvention. He was searching for a creative path, even though he had no idea what that was.
Which is significant because the sources mention his family didn't really have that creative gene.
Right. He wasn't carrying on some family tradition. He was consciously trying to build something totally new, defined by this intense, singular focus. And that trait, that intensity, we definitely see it pop up again later, both for good and for bad.
So once he lands on film as the path, he attacks it with that same intensity he had on the football field.
Totally. The sources say he went the old school way in L.A.,
right,
grinding it out.
No easy route.
Not at all. We're talking years of just working his way up,
Yeah.
fetching coffee, running errands, doing the physical labor, like being a grip on set.
Learning the ropes from the ground up.
Exactly. He learned the technical side of telling stories by starting at the very bottom, which probably gave him a real appreciation for every piece of the production puzzle.
And slowly climbed the ladder, producing commercials, then independent films.
Yeah. But what drew him in at first, it wasn't necessarily, dreams of winning an Oscar or being famous.
It was more practical.
Seems like it. It was the adventure. He saw film as a way to get paid to go to all these places that I never would have been to.
So experiencing the world, collecting stories, but not necessarily his own stories yet, more like gathering material from others.
Right. And that whole path eventually led him to this really high-level, successful role as head of content for Yeti.
Which wasn't just any job. It was high profile, paid extremely well, described sometimes as being like $1 million job.
Yeah. That kind of success, it demanded he become a master storyteller, and maybe more importantly, a master editor of narrative, how to shape a story.
That's where the structure part comes in, isn't it?
Absolutely. He was directing these short films featuring big names, Margot Price, Ryan Bingham, the bull rider J.B. Monty.
Big projects.
Yeah. But crucially, in that job, he worked with someone who became a real mentor, someone who taught him the absolute fundamentals of story structure and editing.
And he was open to learning.
Seems like it. He admitted he was initially out of his league, which takes some humility at that level.
True.
And the big lesson wasn't about fancy camera work. It was about narrative economy. What do you leave out? How do you sequence things for the biggest emotional punch?
And this becomes crucial later for his songwriting.
Totally. His entire professional film career essentially became about celebrating other people, making sure their stories were told right, told artistically.
That's a really interesting way to frame it. Like he was doing this massive multi-year research project on the human condition and how to structure narratives about it.
Focused on documenting people who trust their gut and follow their instincts. He was learning from them how you build a strong, compelling story.
And you see that dedication in his independent film work, too.
For sure. He made a documentary about the artist Terry Allen, who, as we'll get into, becomes this massive creative influence later on.
Okay.
And he directed that film, All That Is Sacred, which dives into that hazy, super creative vibe of 1970s Key West.
That Key West film sounds like the peak of his research into creative truth, in a way.
It really does. It meant telling the stories of these American literary giants like Thomas McQueen and Jim Harrison, plus Jimmy Buffett.
Legends.
Right. And to successfully structure stories about people who live so freely, Ballew had to get really good at finding the core truth, the emotional arc, the necessary structure within all the chaos of their lives.
So all this work, finding the truth and structure in other people's stories, whether for Yeti or Key West, it became this completely unintentional training ground.
Exactly. His unexpected prep for his ultimate artistic expression. Songwriting. He already had the structure down cold. He just needed his own subject matter.
Okay, but underneath all that success, that mastery of structure in the film world, the sources show this quiet storm was building.
Yeah. We have to shift now to the really difficult part. The decade defined by addiction. And the sources, they don't hold back. The details show this frighteningly rapid acceleration.
It wasn't like a slow creep.
No, this was a wildfire. The addiction kind of quietly took over for more than a decade, starting when he was in his mid-20s.
Went from drinking too much.
Yeah, in his mid-20s to this extreme ramp-up into severe opiate addiction in just, like, a year and a half.
The speed is terrifying, and the amount, it's almost unbelievable.
50 or 60 Vicodin a day.
Just think about that routine the sources describe. Setting 10 pills on the nightstand.
Hitting the alarm, taking those 10, hitting snooze. And only when the opiates kicked in could he actually face getting up.
That just lays bare the depth of the dependency.
Absolutely. And as tolerance builds, which it always does, the progression was fast and really unavoidable. From Vicodin, it quickly went to OxyContin.
And then heroin.
And then heroin, yeah. This is that incredible hole that, frankly, so many people fall into and just never get out of.
And it's wild that, as the sources note, very few people he worked with knew how bad it was. He was functioning at this incredibly high level at Yeti.
Which speaks to how addiction can hide in plain sight sometimes.
So, given the huge success he had, and how self-destructive the drug use became, how do we know this wasn't just him trading addictions, like the high of work for the high of drugs, instead of dealing with the underlying issues?
That's really the core question with an addictive personality, isn't it?
Yeah.
The sources suggest it wasn't like a calculated choice to self-destruct. It was more like a desperate, urgent attempt to find relief. Ballew himself says he was trying to cope with anxiety and all the hell that comes with heaven.
Meaning the pressure of success.
Seems like it. He couldn't handle the internal pressure, the anxiety, and the opiates offered this temporary but ultimately devastating way out.
The desire for escape got intense. But he makes this really important distinction in the sources.
Right. He clarifies that the thought of, going to a ranch and actively shooting himself, that was not an option for him, a line he wouldn't cross.
But
He admits he prayed on a few flights that the plane would just crash. He thought that would have been the easiest way out of the mess he'd made.
so a passive wish for it to end rather than an active plan?
Exactly. But ultimately, that same all-in personality kind of forces him to confront things directly. He decided he had to take on sobriety himself. She called for help, started addressing the problem head-on.
But the real push, the external shove he seemed to need, wasn't just his own willpower.
No, it was this sudden, massive family crisis that became the unavoidable catalyst for change.
His father's illness.
Yeah, just devastating. Mid-February, his dad felt sick, drove to work only 5 minutes from home, but somehow ended up driving an hour and a half the wrong way to San Antonio.
Just completely disoriented.
Totally. And that led to the diagnosis, encephalitis, this severe inflammation of the brain.
Which had catastrophic effects.
It attacked his memory, basically wiped out 80% of his father's recollection, and almost killed him. The emotional hit on Ballew was just immediate and brutal.
He talks about calling his mom on the way to the hospital and realizing it was the first time in his entire life he'd ever heard his father cry.
Imagine that.
Seeing his hero, the guy he idolized, lying there in a hospital bed, helpless, tubes everywhere. Just devastating. The anxiety must have been overwhelming.
And here's the absolute critical window. The moment everything pivoted, his dad was basically gone, mentally and physically, for 3 months. Ballew was sleeping at the hospital every other night, trying to be that constant presence.
And he says, in his old life, the addicted life,
He would have immediately called the old tambourine man for pills, or just emotionally checked out during those 3 months of intense, sustained stress and grief.
but instead,
Instead of collapsing under it all, the sources suggest that the sheer necessity of being present, having to be the strong one, it forced him to redirect all that energy.
he chose a different response during the absolute peak of stress.
He made the decision right then, I'm just going to write.
And that decision to write, it gets cemented by his move back to Austin.
Yeah. Austin wasn't just geography for him. It was like this cultural space that actually welcomed people trying to reinvent themselves.
Gave him that renewed pride and sense of self.
Exactly. It's a town, as the sources suggest, that kind of takes you as you are, welcomes its own back when they need to start over, without the judgment you might find elsewhere, like L.A., or even the rigid expectations of the Texas he'd fled.
And he finds the creative philosophy he needs from Terry Allen.
The artist and musician he'd met through Ryan Bingham. Allen became this key mentor figure, but not in a technical way, like teaching him guitar chords.
More philosophical.
Totally. Allen taught him the importance of the daily ritual, showing up every morning and just making something artistic, a sculpture, painting, poem, song, whatever.
And the key lesson that really stuck with Ballew?
Was that the goal isn't commercial success. The audience is irrelevant, Allen told him. What matters is just showing up, being honest, and following whatever's genuinely in your head or your heart that day.
And for Ballew, that relentless daily practice became songwriting. He starts at 37, completely sober.
And he describes it fundamentally not as like, oh, I'll start a music career now.
No, it was survival.
Exactly, a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
It was a purge, this necessary release of 4 decades of stuff, experiences, anxieties, thoughts that he'd been trying to numb or run away from.
His new sober life, it gave him a lot of time and energy to burn.
And knowing his personality, he knew that idle time was just not healthy for him.
Which brings us back to that central idea.
Right, the addictive personality that drove him to pursue drugs to the absolute limit now drove him to pursue creativity to the absolute limit. The energy was just rerouted from self-destruction to self-expression.
But at first he was hesitant, didn't want to share his original stuff.
Yeah, his friend said he was just kind of mucking around with cover songs, sometimes even deliberately making them sound bad, joking about it to keep it at a distance.
But then he hit that woodshed period.
Full-on woodshedding. For listeners maybe not familiar, that just means locking yourself away for intense private practice, honing your craft without public eyes on you.
And Ballew committed completely.
Playing constantly, finding his voice, writing a couple songs a day. It was almost like he was desperately trying to catch up on 40 years of art he hadn't made yet.
And his friends noticed the shift pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah. The feedback loop confirmed it. One friend had initially joked, you got to write 100 bad songs first, never thinking Ballew would actually quit his high-paying film job for this.
But the quality jumped fast.
Dramatically. From maybe one good song out of 10 tries to 1 out of 5, then suddenly 1 out of 3 was hitting the mark.
And his whole demeanor changed when he played them.
Yeah, his friends watched him go from kind of joking and making fun of the songs to this really genuine, heartfelt delivery. And that's when they realized, holy shit, this is for real.
He was actually recording real, sincere songs.
And the first one that really signaled this change, that got the really good validation, was Tortilla Moon. Sent is just a voice memo.
He started collaborating heavily with Jesse Tate, too.
Describes Tate as one of the most talented guys he's ever worked with. Their dynamic in the studio sounds incredibly intense.
Like brothers.
Or ex-girlfriends is the quote, which suggests this cycle of intense creative friction, arguments, laughing fits, but ultimately this shared obsession with making the song perfect, as good as it could possibly be.
And all that intensity leads to this really unique sound, especially on his album Rio Bravo.
The description we get is just fantastic.
Uh-huh.
If Townes Van Zandt was produced by Ennio Morricone.
Okay, let's unpack that for people. Townes Van Zandt, that brings the lyrical depth, right?
Exactly. The dark, heartbreaking, almost literary Texas songwriting tradition. Heavy stuff.
And then the Ennio Morricone part, the spaghetti Western composer.
That brings the structure, the mood, the tension. The sound isn't cluttered. It uses really sparse arrangements, tons of negative space, minor keys that build that suspense.
Deep reverb.
Yeah, deep reverb, creating this vast cinematic landscape. It puts the emphasis on atmosphere and drama, makes the songs feel less like simple folk tunes and more like miniature films.
Which is his film background showing up directly in the music.
Precisely. Now we can really connect those dots we started with. All those years directing, shaping mood, plotting story arcs in film, learning that economy of editing.
It just translated directly into his songwriting. He was always a master structuralist.
It's almost visual, like you said. A director uses empty space in a shot for drama or loneliness. Ballew uses sparse music and these simple, truthful lyrics, mostly just guitar and voice, to create that same cinematic feeling.
And even if the chords aren't always predictable.
The visual language, the mood, it's perfectly controlled. And despite trying to hide his past for so long, those deep, deep roots of being Texan, they finally come through. Not in a forced way, but because the art needs them to feel authentic.
His writing really works on contrast, too, doesn't it? Which is a classic film technique.
Absolutely. It's poignant, but often funny. Relatable, but sometimes quite cerebral. Simple delivery, but the scope feels cinematic.
He has that great quote about what makes art feel real.
If you can make someone laugh and cry in the same paragraph, there's no closer reflection to real life. That mix of tragedy and humor, that is the human experience.
And he gets that mix by putting intensely personal, painful details right out there. He doesn't flinch from vulnerability.
No. There's that line in a song about his father not remembering his name, which Ballew admits he wrote partly just to keep his emotions at bay, while processing the grief.
To take a private heartbreak like that and distill it into a simple line for everyone to hear, that's incredibly powerful art.
And he nails the core mechanics of his own addiction in that other quote from his work. It perfectly shows that insatiable, hungry nature of it.
If I had a nickel, I'd find a game. If I had a dollar to make it rain, if it rained an ocean, I'd drink it dry and lay me down dissatisfied.
Chilling. It perfectly captures that addictive cycle, right? The craving that just cannot be filled no matter how much you consume, whether it's money, drugs, success. That underlying feeling of being dissatisfied always remains.
But here's the amazing irony, the thing that kind of justifies the whole painful journey.
Yeah, the sources point out that the exact same personality trait that made him need a bottle full when 1 or 2 Vicodin didn't work, that's the same drive that makes him take this music thing to the absolute end.
The energy's just pointed in the different direction,
Mm.
but the intensity is identical.
He goes at songwriting the same way he went at football and film. Totally immersed, obsessed with getting the artistic vision just right,
And the difficult truth, the one the sources acknowledge.
is that every one of his songs couldn't be told unless he had been through that. The darkness was, in a way, required homework for the honesty he achieves now. You can't write that truth without living it.
But is that just, the standard artist cleans up their act story? What makes Ballew's version, this channeling of the addictive personality, feel different?
I think what makes it unique is the structure he already had in place. He didn't just stumble into a creative hobby. He applied decades of professional narrative expertise to his own raw pain.
The framework was waiting.
The framework was waiting. And his father's crisis provided both the subject matter and the absolute urgency to use it. Plus, he found this sense of noble purpose in it, which lifts the art beyond just being therapeutic for himself.
That noble purpose feels like the final, most validating piece of the transformation.
Yeah. Songwriting became this necessary balm for him personally. But then he saw its power to build community, to offer relief to other people.
He admits creating can feel narcissistic sometimes.
Sure. But the moment he describes as most validating wasn't getting a good review or selling records.
No, it was that young woman.
Exactly. A young woman came up to him and shared her story. Said she started her own sobriety journey after watching one of his films, and then his songs helped her keep going.
Wow.
That connection, that's his fundamental goal now. Ballew believes the highest purpose of a song is simply to make someone else not feel alone, whether they're dealing with addiction, heartbreak, loss, whatever it is.
And he's still relentless about it.
Absolutely. When someone asked what he did right after finishing his Rio Bravo album, he just said, I made another one. The creative engine just doesn't stop.
Scott Ballew's journey is just remarkable when you lay it all out. Think about the sheer scope of change we've discussed.
It's huge.
Going from being this high school football star who actively hid his past to a filmmaker focused on structuring other people's stories, to a guy who, just a few years back, was terrified to even sing his own words in public, that ultimate pressured at bat, as he put it. He went from burying his identity completely to building this critically acclaimed music career based on expressing his most painful, authentic truths.
And what's so fascinating here, what the sources really bring out, is how all those years Ballew spent as a filmmaker, doing the research, diving deep into other people's lives and other people's expressions.
All that time mastering external narratives.
Exactly. All that time making sure their stories were told right. It turned out to be the essential preparation for his own ultimate artistic expression. He needed that structural discipline. And then the personal crisis provided the absolute necessity to finally tell his own story.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought. For you, the listener, especially if you're someone immersed in researching, studying, or maybe telling the stories of others in your own work or passion, Ballew notes that consciously, or maybe subconsciously, the act of putting stories to melody starts to chip away at how those experiences actually affected your life. It reframes them.
Yeah.
So if your work involves studying or shaping other people's narratives, what's the personal story, the profound truth that might be waiting inside you, waiting for you to finally uncover it and give it expression?
That feels like the deepest takeaway from Ballew's long, winding, and ultimately incredibly creative evolution.